Hello again. Let's get started. Thank you all for joining once again. Welcome to the seventh and last seminar of this edition of the Priberam Machine Learning Lunch Seminars. Today we have with us Sofia Teixeira from Hospital da Luz Learning Health, who will present the work Revealing Semantic and Emotional Structure of Suicide Notes. Sofia Teixeira holds a PhD in Information Systems and Computer Engineering from Universidade de Lisboa and currently works as a research scientist at Hospital da Luz Learning Health. Prior to that, she was a postdoc at the Indiana University Network Science Institute. Sofia, thank you once again for joining us. And without further ado, I think we can start.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for this amazing invitation and for being here with you. And thank you, of course, all of you for attending. I hope that you are able to enjoy this presentation, although I imagine it's a little bit different from the previous ones, and you will understand why in a second. So as Peter said, I'm presenting then a work about the semantic and emotional structure of suicide notes using the framework of cognitive network science. And in a few moments, I will try to give as many brief details as I can so you can understand what is this type of framework and representation. And well, why to study this? Actually, I started this while I was finishing my PhD. So while I was still at Técnico and in Esquide. And since then, of course, a lot of our discussions of our group has been around why is this suicide ideation so important and why do we want to study it? And then we got access to actually a real data set of suicide notes. And then we, of course, wanted to know more about what is like the mindset behind these suicide notes. And also because, I don't know if you know, but for example, the last report from the World Health Organization says that around 800,000 people actually die of suicide every year, which if we think about it is like a person each 40 seconds. So when we think about this, and of course, everyone more or less knows someone that may know someone that committed suicide, what we always think about it is what kind of sorts of thoughts and feelings are these people experiencing while they have this suicidal ideation, and how might our understanding of these phenomena actually improve some kind of prevention efforts. And of course, these are challenging questions. We believe that suicide notes may represent one potential window into the psychology of these individuals. And so our goal is that by analyzing the language and the contents of these suicide notes, we can gain like unique insights into these kind of features of individual experiences, and then gain this greater understanding about the cognitive process that is following this suicidal ideation. So our work, to our knowledge, is like the first application of network science analysis to these suicide notes, and building a network, so connecting concepts that are present in these suicide notes, will allow us to track not only which words appear more often, because I will explain, we will also track that in the network, but also how they are used and in what context. So what are their neighborhoods and how can these neighborhoods kind of inform us about these main concepts that are present in the suicide notes. So this way we are able to try to not only reveal how these concepts are perceived, but also how they are kind of organized and interconnected in the human mind. And so by reconstructing this collective mindset expressed by these last written words, we can then try to at least gain new hints about how could we try to build something that would help prevent these events. And so going to our data sets and our approach, we, as I said, we have a data set of 139 genuine suicide notes. And what we do with these nodes actually is build networks with them. So these are the main framework for all the analysis that I'll be presenting today. And so we will be using cognitive network science. I will explain the concepts, but also tools from psycholinguistics and semantic frame theory to introduce then this network representation of suicidal ideation. And so these letters come from a collection of suicide notes from sources like newspapers, books, and diaries collected by clinical psychologists, mostly in the US and in Europe. And the notes were written and collected over a time window spanning more or less 60 years. And each one of these letters has on average 120 words. And we found at least 2,000 different concepts that are stated in the entire corpus. And so we build two different types of networks, the co-occurrence networks that will capture just how the words follow each other. So we'll be connecting each two words that are connected in the sentence. So for example, in the sentence here, I need to go. In the co-occurrence chain, we will build a network in which we will have the edge I need to go, and go now. So we have just this co-occurrence chain. And we will also build a subject verb object triplet in which we will then connect only the subjects, the verbs, and the objects of those same sentences. And we will enrich these networks actually by using also sentiment and emotional labels that I will also go into that in more detail later in the presentation. And the thing when we are building these kind of frameworks and analyzing these data sets is that we usually need to kind of have this null model. So what are we comparing with? What is like our baseline comparison and so on? And actually, it's very difficult to kind of compare suicide notes with other types of text. By the end of the presentation, we can discuss that a little further. But then we are not kind of discriminating suicide notes from other types of text. What we are using is a data set of free associations. So free associations in the sense that they are captured like the structure of the semantic memory, like I tell you a word and you will remember other words. And then we have like the semantic associations that are captured in people during mind wandering. So while they are thinking freely without any kind of additional theme or semantic syntactic constraints. And so I will present then three different analyses in the sense that we are building a narrative in which we will try to first assess what is like this emotional balance present in the suicide notes. I will also explain what emotional balance is and how then we are mapping this sentiment and how it is organized in this collective mindset present in the suicide notes. And then after delving into this kind of collective emotional balance or absence of it, we will delve then into the self. So we will use the subject-verb-object relationships to kind of have a bigger intuition about how the self is being perceived and even positioned in the suicide notes. And then on study 3, we will then combine semantic frames with emotional data so we can kind of describe and quantify the emotions that are being elicited in the concepts that are most used in the letters. So these kind of emotional profiles that are associated with these concepts in the suicide notes. And so we are going to compare always this with this free association network. So we can have like this intuition about what it would be, what would be like the emotions that would be elicited or would emerge in this free association setting, and what is like the big difference when we are talking about suicide notes. I can, in the positive note, so because I know this is a heavy theme, that for example, and this, it was surprising, but maybe not so surprising that, for example, the most prominent concept in the suicide notes actually is love. And so love is actually almost an integrator of information relating the self to the others. And we will go more into that in just a few moments. So the first study about emotional balance in suicide notes using the co-occurrence networks. So we define emotional balance actually based in some social science theories from the 40s. So in 1946, actually either define the structural balance theory that would state that when we have two people and the third, it could be an object or even a person, how this triad would be balanced in terms of having like positive feelings or even some tension. And so structural balance theory is defined by having like these balanced triads in which we have what we already know so well. The friend of my friend is my friend, so everything is fine, everything seems balanced, we are all in peace with each other, supposedly. And then we also have the other balanced triad in which we are evoking some kind of alliance. So we have like this saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so in this sense, we have like this alliance, so everything is also more or less balanced. And then we have these two types of triads that are considered unbalanced, in which I always give like the love triangle example on this one. That is, we have two people competing for the attention of a third one, for example. And when we have like everyone that dislikes each other, so everything is kind of messy in this setting. So we have the separation between positive and negative structural balance in these kind of triads. And so this concept was then extended to networks. So in this context, we were talking about social networks. Each node is a person. We have positive and negative connections, saying that I'm a friend or an enemy, or whatever positive and negative feelings that we have towards each other. And so when we have a network, we consider that the network is balanced if all their triads are balanced. So the degree of balance came to define what would be like almost the percentage of balance that I have in my network. So we define that as a fraction of the balanced triangles over all the amount of triangles. And in a mathematical way, actually, when we have positive signs as weight 1 and negative signs as weight -1, if we multiply the signs of the triad, it should be positive, so the triad is balanced. But this is just the baseline theory that I wanted to give you, just to get a hint of where this theory comes from. And this theory has been long used, for example, to study how peer influence actually shapes our social networks, and how do we adapt the positive and negative relations in the network to get some structural balance in our own networks. It has been used, for example, in the context of studying some kind of stress in cooperative dilemmas, in which subjects that engage, for example, in unbalanced triads, they activate brain regions concerned with processing distress and cognitive dissonance. Then this was later explored to a lot of different contexts, biological networks, financial networks, and so on. And actually, another recent approach shifts also this psychological connotation of structural balance from social ties to the way that brain regions activate or get inhibited over time in clinical populations. So in this very interesting study, by analyzing the brain functional connectivity, Maradimanes and colleagues actually showed that there were overrepresented balanced triads in brain networks of people diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, in, of course, comparison with the healthy controls. So in this context, actually, we are shifting from these social connections to kind of cognitive neuroscience, and the term balance does not imply a positive social interaction, but rather like a positively signed brain activity. And so inspired by this, we decided to shift also to this kind of emotional balance. And this emotional balance is defined by creating the signs on the links based actually on the valences of the words. So we have positive words here in blue, we have negative words in red, and actually we can also have neutral words in which they are not associated with any specific valence, so they are neutral words. And we define emotional balance as having like a majority of positive words or when we don't have any kind of overrepresented valence in the triad. So here, for example, we have a positive, a neutral, and a negative. So we kind of consider that there is not like a stress-induced emotion in this type of triad, because we are not able to decide like what is like the most prominent valence. And so we consider that each time we have a majority of negative words, we actually have then this unbalanced triad. So we have like this negative emotion being overcoming like the narrative in this specific context. And so we define these positive and negative links based on the valences of the words. And actually this follows the structural balance theory that I just explained in terms of the valences of the links. Although, of course, here we are shifting again the context from social ties to then emotional connections based on the valence of the narrative. And what we do is then when we have our co-occurrence network, so when we have our words of our suicide notes, we build the co-occurrence network. So we are connecting words that are followed by each other in the text. We analyze this emotional balance that I will present the results next, but we always need like a null model to assess the statistical significance of our results. So what did we use as a null model? So in network science, actually, we have, it's not like a baseline null model, but it's a very well-used null model that is the configuration model, in which we have like the same degree sequence. So each word has the same amount of connections as in the original text, but now I'm rewiring those connections. And so here we are kind of mixing a little bit the syntactic structure of these networks as they were in the original network. And then we have a second null model that is, we keep the same structure as in the original text, but now I'm shuffling the sentiment labels. So now what I'm saying is that if now I have these positive and negative words positioned in other places of the network, actually their degree may change. So the number of words with which they are connected may change. So how does also emotional balance change in this context? And so with these two null models, we also, just going back a little bit, we also compare this with the free association networks. But let's go first and analyze the suicide notes results. So what we did was to calculate not only the degree of balance, as we just discussed, but also the frequency of the different triads. And this triad is impossible to occur because we don't have like a combination of valences that will give rise to this kind of configuration. But what was surprise for us is that the co-occurrence network of the original suicide notes network actually has 85% of all positive triads. So we are saying that we have this predominant all positive triads. So eliciting also that we have this compartmentalized positive thinking, something like that. And when we compare with the two null models, so with the configuration model, this frequency doesn't change much, but when we shuffle the labels, it changes a lot. So what we can conclude here in these statistics is that actually the position of these positive words and how they have this triadic closure in the network, they are statistically significant when we think about if these positive and negative words were connected other way in the network. And when we compare this, for example, with the free association networks, we see that the degree of balance actually of the empirical free association networks is much lower. And also, even though the majority of the triads are all positive, we have like, it's not like a more equal distribution of the triads, but for example, what we could have expected here, like having all negative triads and so on, we find a more predominant all negative triads in the free associations. And also when we compare with the null models, we see that even we still have like a great all positive triads. So again, how we perceive concepts and how we connect them. And in this case, how they are connected in the suicide notes. They kind of show that they are not like random associations, or that one just have some kind of mind wandering would achieve the same levels of balance. And so what can we conclude on this first study actually? So as I just mentioned, we have this emotional structure of these conceptual associations in suicide notes that are more compartmentalized, where all the positive triads are more frequent. And so this compartmentalized mental context actually have been investigated within social psychology, psychological studies looking at vulnerability and resiliency to depression. So these mental contents are typically described as compartmentalized when we have like this affective information organized with respect to a given construct, so that positive and negative associations are relatively segregated and those of the same polarity clustered together. That is what we are observing here. And it is possible that this highly balanced pattern actually may be an indicative of this psychological strategy for coping with the psychic associated with the suicidal ideation. And so we can also kind of argue that this higher degree of organization may suggest some kind of active process of motivated cognition, so that the individual may be driven to associate positive concepts with one another more readily than they would in a free association context, as we just said. And so we think that, of course, this preliminary evidence calls for further studies and even some kind of survey-based research in order to investigate these possibilities. And so we shift now from the emotional balance of these collective suicide notes to kind of shift to these subject-verb-object relationships and study the self, how the self then is perceived. So we use the subject-verb-object in this context because we are interested in studying then the central actors and in particular the self, the I, and how it is related to other people and other concepts in the suicide note. So the SVO representation here is more suitable for this task than the co-occurrence network, since we have here the representation as the number of relations a given word is involved. That is not determined by the number of its occurrence alone, but rather the centrality of its position in the syntactic structure of sentences in which they occur. So we will go and observe these core actors and themes, and then see how these relations are kind of connected with love or lack of thereof, of course, taking, giving, going, telling. And so we will study a little bit how these concepts, what is their strength in the network, and also how central they are. And so when we build these SVO networks, we can see that actually we have like these central concepts of the pronouns of the I, the you, the she, and actually we also have love. So we have these four main concepts that are really central in the network. And when we say central, we are talking about the sum of the weights of the neighborhood. So how many nodes they are connected and how strongly they are connected. And so having these personal pronouns, and in particular I, so the self, actually they kind of indicate like this main sentence building and these meaning making entities in suicide notes. And so this structure being defined like almost a star-like cluster around I, and being much less centralized with the other parts of the networks, kind of indicate that relationships with other people are of crucial importance in suicide notes. And so this almost seems to reflect like their personal character and focus on relations between the authors and the other people, as well as relationships with themselves, actually. And to go further in this self-analysis, we actually studied this degeneracy notion. So that degeneracy measures like the tendency that when we have like a random walker in the network, starting from a random node, just after one step, it ended like in a limited set of central nodes. And so we observed like a very high degeneracy around I, meaning that we have like a very large subset of nodes that are linked to the giant component of the network only through I. So it means that, for example, here around the I, we have that 33.70% of the negative words are linked to the network this way. And so here we are observing that actually a lot of negative words are connected through I, but they are not connected like between themselves. So we don't have like these triadic closures. And actually this will also give us like a notion that no other node plays like such an important role for the overall connectivity and negative sentiment. So in the last study, and I will go further, we observed this kind of positive balance and this triadic closure around the positive words. But actually now we observe that the self is kind of connected with a lot of negative words. They are just not like closuring with other nodes, so they are not forming triangles. And so this study allowed us to then understand that the self plays a central role. So in particular, like as this main hub that is connected to negatively balanced concepts. We also saw then that this structure in this concept network is determined primarily by pronouns. So we have like this connection between the I and the others, and also actually to love. And love is the main verb noun, and well, it does not have like a significant unique neighborhood associating concepts, but it's kind of like knitting together regions that are focused around these three main pronouns. So actually the people. So qualitatively, this suggests that on average, a significant feature of suicidal ideation may be pronounced perhaps a little bit excessive and largely negative focus on self, as well as personal and intimate relations with other people. And actually, this kind of echoes research in clinical psychology, showing that this kind of negative self-schemata, as well as enhanced processing of negative self-referential information, play an important role in the emergence and persistence of depressive symptoms. And so, connecting this with study one, as I just mentioned, we can also kind of suggest that we have some kind of hidden vulnerability of compartmentalization happening. So we saw that we had compartmentalized thinking around positive concepts, but now we also saw that we have a lot of negativity connected to the I. And so we think that this interpretation, of course, provide more insight into why in the previous study, we did not observe a prevalence of negative triads, like individuals that are experiencing this suicidal ideation. They may use this affective compartmentalization to orient like their mental associations toward positively balanced contexts in general, but they are also reserving this negatively balanced context for the perceptions of themselves. And now we move forward then to the last study. I don't know if I still have much time, but I will try to be as brief as possible. So now we will go to the semantic frames and emotional perceptions in the suicide nodes. What are we doing? How are we uncovering this? So we are turning to sentiment analysis and emotional profiling to kind of find the sentiment features of suicide nodes that who knows, may be helpful in the future to kind of participate in some kind of supervised detection of suicidal ideation in text identification tasks. So We will be using semantic frame theory that indicates how associations between concepts in language give rise to the meaning attributed to the words in the texts. So if we consider these network neighborhoods as semantic frames, we can assess the meaning that are attributed to these words just by looking to their neighborhoods. And to do this, we use the NRC emotional lexicon. This data set includes 8 basic emotional states, whose combination then can give rise to a wide variety of nuanced emotion. And so we will be considering the observed emotional richnesses of a word or a set of words against random expectations. So if we would sample like words that elicit emotions like randomly, we will then compare that mechanism to what we find in the suicide notes by reporting the scores of these observed emotional profiles. So let's dive a little bit more into what we are analyzing. So we observed that in the co-occurrence network in which we have like all concepts then that are present in the suicide notes, that we have like these highly central concepts that are closer to the others. So for example, love, want, help, life, and I were concepts that we found that were statistically significantly closer to the other words than the rest of the concepts of the suicide notes. So we wanted to investigate like what are the semantic frames of all these concepts, what kind of emotions they are eliciting, and how typical or untypical they appear when comparing to common language. And in our case, comparing with the free association, so capturing this mind wandering that hopefully doesn't have any kind of suicidal association. So these highly central concepts are all common words, but we will see that their semantic frames in the suicide letters actually are shaped by emotions that can differ a bit from the ways that we usually think, or at least in these more clinical terms, the healthy people think. So we start by analyzing what do people who commit suicide actually want. So what does want mean for them? And in the co-occurrence network, such concept is actually linked with words associated with anticipation and positive emotions, such as joy and trust. So we have these emotional flowers in which we are presenting the z-scores that are statistically significant here when they transpose the circle. So we see that, for example, in the suicide notes, want is really connected with anticipation, but also joy, trust, but also sadness. While in the free associations, actually, so in this mind-wandering setting, want is actually only like the emotion that it elicits most is just surprise. So this difference indicates that the emotions like of anticipation, joy, even a bit of fear here, and sadness characterize want more as a proxy for both positive and negative ideas in the context of suicidal ideation. And so this profile in the semantic frame of want suggests that what the authors of suicide notes express with want is not only the desire of positive and even maybe trustful things, but also some sad or even frightening ideas. Going to the concept of help, so we can see that actually help is associated with words eliciting mostly positive emotions. So it's featuring like high levels of anticipation, joy, trust, and we can see this almost as a projection into the future, like looking for help with future events or plans. But we can also see that the trust associated to help in suicide notes is also common with the linguist baseline of free association. So, and we can see that, for example, in the suicide notes, we see again sadness that is also featured here as also being an emotion that is present in help in suicide notes, but not so much in the free association. And so Anticipation and sadness actually reveal some kind of evidence of resignation, at least according to Plutik's Atlas of Emotions. So, and as we saw, this kind of anticipation and sadness is not so present in the free-mindering data set. Jumping now to life and love, so two very common words and concepts that we use in our daily lives. So usually life is a concept with positive connotations. So at least here in the free association, we can see joy, trust, of course, a little bit of anticipation and even surprise. But in the language of suicide notes, the semantic frame of life actually elicits no significantly positive emotion. So we only see anticipation. So in suicide notes, life as a trustless concept. So it's like we don't have any kind of trust in life when we check this suicide notes semantic frame for life. And this increased level of anticipation can also mean that we have like this rather neutral projection into the future. So we don't have like, it's completely devoid of any emotion. So this is kind of a striking result that we think that could be further investigated in the view of psychological theories and even narrative psychology, since we usually tend to kind of organize our narratives in a meaningful way. So we have something that gives us purpose. And for life in suicide notes, we actually see that we have no emotion at all. So love, that was actually then the most prominent concept in the entire data set. We can see that love consists in the semantic frame mostly joy and trust. And this, in opposite what we found in life, actually indicates a positive perception of love itself. In line with what is also found in the free associations dataset. And so we can see that here at least it's similar being in both settings, so in the suicidal ideation, but also in the absence of suicidal ideation. What again we found here is also that love has also sadness as a prominent emotion in the suicide notes. And this can indicate actually some kind of melancholic framing of love. So in contrast with this all positive connotation found in the free association, and which is also like expected in common language. And we will finish this analysis like looking to the self. And as we saw, and actually this is all also connects together. So the previous studies, we found that the self was the hub of connecting negative concepts, even if they are not connected between each other. And here in the semantic frame of the self, we don't see any kind of emotion but sadness. While, for example, in the free association, we can see joy and trust. So in the absence of suicidal ideation, people tend to frame the I along with positive emotions like trust and joy. So these results also highlight some kind of negative and trustless perception of the self, because we only have then sadness present there. And so these results may indicate some kind of meaning communicated through individual concepts that is not the same as found in common language. So instead, I think that suicide notes are introducing here some kind of richly nuanced context that shift the meaning and emotion and the emotional content of these words that when we think about them in just a normal context and a free mind-wandering context, they kind of have like fundamental differences when we investigate these suicide notes. So a brief discussion here, what we saw until now. So we saw that structural balance is a key mechanism that came from social sciences and is now being used in cognitive organization and in particularly as a mechanism to try to solve this kind of conflicting attitudes and beliefs. We also delve into that according to this meaning maintenance model, people are fundamentally driven to construct their lives, perceptions, and so on by trying to obtain some kind of coherence among their self-perceptions and what they perceive of the world. And so research on narrative psychology actually has found that people often try to utilize kind of these narratives about themselves, how they relate with the others and the world, as a mean to kind of maintain a sense of coherence and meaning with their own lives and perceptions. So we think that this suggests that writing a suicide note may represent a way of trying to reestablish this sense of meaningfulness and coherence in face of circumstances that, of course, end up in tragedy. And so, in short, we argue that people are driven to perceive their lives as meaningful and coherent. They also use narratives and storytelling as a way to try to encapsulate and restore these perceptions when they feel threatened. And so potential ways of improving this coherence of one's own psychological narratives is by trying to introduce some kind of balance or positive emotional semantic frames that otherwise would be unbalanced and creating conflict and tension in the cognitive setting. And this has been a long journey. So when we think about suicide notes, we may have jumped to conclusions, but as we thought, there are a lot of nuances here in the middle. So I want to end up like releasing a little bit of these ideas. So this network science approach allows us to have some quantitative analysis of these genuine suicide notes. And here a little bit of a provocation. So we move a little bit beyond black boxes approaches when we are approaching suicidal ideation. So we merge cognitive network science with these theoretical tools from psychology to then obtain this more detailed understanding of the underlying psychological states associated with the people that committed suicide. So these methodologies, so this pipeline allow us to address these questions about higher level psychological process and test hypotheses based on theory. And moreover, we believe that this is a valid approach for future understanding of new possibilities for suicide prevention. And I finish here. Thank you very much. These are my collaborators, Simon, Trevor, and Massimo. And again, thank you so much for having me. And I'm open for questions, of course.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Sofia. It was really interesting. So yeah, it's now time for questions. You can either click the raise hand button on Zoom and I will allow you to unmute your microphone, or you can ask your questions via chat. There was a question via chat already. It was during the first analysis. So yeah,
yes.
whether you could elaborate how you created those triads from suicide notes.
Yes, of course. So I don't know if maybe it would be better to even show here. So, but basically, we have text, as you just said, and very well. So we have text and we have the chains of the words. So we create networks in which we are connecting each following word. So if I have, I need to go now, as I had in the slides, I will connect I with needs, so I have to know it with an edge, and so on. I'm connecting these. And when I build a network with all the suicide nodes, so we are merging all the text together in a single network, then we will have like the structure of this network that will have triads that will emerge from these connections. And so that is the way that we create, so we extract the triads from the text, because we are using all text together to create a single network. This network will then have a structure, and we identify all triads that are present in this network. I don't know if I was able to clarify this bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Perfectly clear. Okay. We have one question from Luis Cabrita. I'm going to ask him to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation. I just had a quick question so that I could understand better, because I don't think I fully understood it. I'm not an expert in network analysis, but you said on study 2 that personal pronouns referring to self and others, so you, I, she, etc., were central to the networks of the suicide notes. And my question is whether this is the case because of the linguistic structure of how a note is written, because if you are writing a letter, you sort of have to connect everything using pronouns, or if it tells us something about the psychological structure of the person, regardless of the medium being a letter. So that's just my question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Luis. Thank you so much. Well, there could be that effect if we think that, as you were saying, we are writing a letter and maybe we are like directing that letter to other people. So we are referring to other people. I think that the question here that we were looking for is that since this was done in the subject verb object network, of course, we would have some subjects that would be prominent, of course. We were just trying to see then if all of them would be prominent or the I would be most prominent. And because even the actors and the verbs, so what we see is that between all these possibilities of having this kind of main concepts in the network, between all of them, then we had then the pronouns being the most prominent, because we could also have like we have love, for example, that is not a pronoun, and it's like the only, or at least the most prominent concept in this network besides the pronouns. So it could be an effect of that, but we could also have some kind of repetition of verbs or other concepts. So I think that we would have to try to compare this with other texts to assess if it's just an effect of the narrative, or if it's what we are arguing, in the sense that what we find after we identify these prominent subjects as the pronouns is that the way that they are connected in the network, they then elicit that notion of they are really, so the I is really connecting with the others, the I is connecting then with those negative concepts. And so we have then this other part in which, as you said, we have this identification of how the I is relating to the others. But for a full assessment of this, I think that maybe we could try to compare with other types of text, even though it's a challenge because it's not easy to find a coherent baseline to compare with.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe letters that aren't suicide letters would be my suggestion. But yeah, thank you. That was it's very interesting lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis.
Okay, so yeah.
Miguel, do you want to ask a question?
Hi.
I think you can,
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Hello. It's just well, congratulations for the work, of course. Very nice work. And so just a comment, I think, about the previous issue. I don't remember the name of the person who asked the question, but I think he's right. I think perhaps to compare with probably some set of letters that are not speaking about suicide, perhaps it will be a good control, especially because I remember there's one of the first papers that first papers that analyze posts in Facebook, if I remember correctly. I remember that they also noticed that, for example, the I and the friendship relations were very was the most common words that they use. Actually, it was kind of funny because they showed also in that paper that it was related or correlated with the age. So people that were younger, they used to speak much more with the I and friends and things like that. And when people were older, they were using other terms like the others and things like that. So it seems like younger are concerned more about themselves, and when you get older, we concern more about the community or the others. So it is just the first comment. And the question is, do you think there is any data set? Do you know if there are data sets related with suicide about social media? Because, well, of course, I think we can think that one of the applications perhaps everyone is looking for is to try to detect someone that is going to decide and make some comments in social media and things like that. Is any can you comment about any research about social media, data sets and things like that?
Thank you so much, Miguel. You had great observations. And regarding the first one, we thought about other types of text, but for example, actually, in the very beginning of this project in a workshop, we thought about comparing maybe with some blog posts or something like that. The issue here is that we know that written text is actually different from online text. And this kind of creates a bit of a psychological shift also in the way that you are writing the stuff. So we are still trying to find our way of what would be like a real good data set to compare with having all these things in consideration. Regarding other data sets, we know that there are some, so it's not so much as written text, but more like suicidal ideation lines. We know that there is at least one center in Amsterdam. We have like, we know that there are some centers that are trying to, you have like these suicide prevention lines and so on, that maybe the transcripts could be like a nice data set to play with and try to see how we could also identify these characteristics. As I mentioned, so this work is, our goal was to kind of delve into all the psychological states and perceptions and so on. So we are not going into like predicting if a letter has suicidal ideation or not, but we truly believe that what we are finding here can be of help to build these predictors to this suicidal ideation. So hopefully, because this is something that we will continue, we are currently on the second manuscript actually continuing the work. So yeah, so hopefully stay tuned, that maybe we'll have further soon.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you all for your questions as well. Very good discussion. And once again, thank you for your presentation, Sofia, and for taking the time to answer some questions. This is it for today. Thank you all for your participation and for being with us during one more edition of the Priberam Machine Learning Seminars. Just a reminder that this is our last presentation of this season, and that you can check the previous presentations on Priberam's YouTube channel if you want to rewatch some of them, or if some of the presentations that you've missed in the past. Yeah, once again, thank you all for participating, and yeah, see you in the next edition. Thank you.